Every day, more than 100,000 tourists walk down Hollywood Boulevard. They photograph stars on the sidewalk. They pose outside the Chinese theater. They spend real money to feel close to something famous. Almost none of them notice the small wooden house sitting a few feet away from all of it. Until one morning, someone did. Because unlike the souvenir shops or the tour buses or the theaters, this house wasn't supposed to exist. No owner, according to any record anyone could find, just one man, a veteran, who built it himself, mostly at night, out of wood other people had thrown away. And what happened after he built it says something about this country that most people would rather not look at directly. For years, Q built houses. Not for himself, for other people. That was the job. Framing walls, reading blueprints, standing on other men's roofs in the California sun, making sure somebody else's family had somewhere dry to sleep. Then the pandemic hit, and the irony is almost impossible to ignore. A man who spent years building homes for strangers couldn't afford one for himself. Nobody warns you it can happen that fast. One year, you're a construction worker with a toolbox in your truck. The next, you're on a sidewalk on Hollywood Boulevard, watching people who paid $40 for a bus tour walk right past you like you're part of the scenery. Q didn't wait for someone to fix that. He decided to fix it himself. Before we go further, it's worth pausing on one word from the last chapter: veteran. Q wasn't an unusual case in that specific way. He was one of thousands of former service members in this country who end up without an address in a system that, on paper, spends enormous effort trying to prevent exactly that. In 2022, the same year Q built this house, the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs helped move more than 40,000 formerly homeless veterans into housing nationwide. In the greater Los Angeles area specifically, VA housing programs placed 1,301 veterans into permanent homes that same year, more than any other city in the country. Those aren't small numbers. That's a real machine, doing real work, staffed by people who show up every day trying to close this exact gap. And Q fell through it anyway. Not because nobody tried, not because the programs don't work. Plenty of veterans go through intake, get matched with a caseworker, and end up housed within that system every year. But that system runs on its own schedule: paperwork, eligibility screening, appointments, availability. It's built to eventually get someone housed. It isn't built to solve the problem of tonight. Q needed tonight solved. So while the machine kept working in the background, the same machine that would go on to house over 1,000 veterans in his city that year, he built his own bridge to get across the gap it couldn't close fast enough. That's not an argument against the system. It's a description of exactly where its edges are and who ends up standing on them. Before there was a house, there was a tent. For months, that was Q's entire address. A stretch of sidewalk, a nylon shell, whatever he could keep dry. And every 2 weeks, like clockwork, the city's cleanup crews came through. It's a routine most people never think about. Encampment cleanups, scheduled sweeps, notices posted the day before. For the city, it's public health policy. For Q, it meant the same thing over and over: break everything down, move it, and rebuild it from nothing again and again, on a schedule he didn't set. He said it plainly, later, to a reporter who asked why he built what he built. "I had an idea to build something on wheels. Not a house that could be swept away every 14 days. A house that could roll. That single requirement, it has to move itself, is the reason everything that follows looks the way it does. Not a cabin, not a shed nailed to the sidewalk. A structure built from the very first board to survive the one thing that kept destroying every version of home he'd had before it." Picture a construction site at the end of the day. The crew clocks out, trucks pull away one by one, the site goes quiet. Q waits. Once it's empty, he walks over to the dumpster at the edge of the lot. The one filled with offcuts, warped boards, scraps too short or too split for anyone's job. Material with no value to anyone still working. He digs, finds 2 boards that are still straight, still solid. He smiles, the kind of smile that isn't happiness exactly, more like relief, like build a way out of homelessness. He learns to square a wall by watching a stranger square a wall on a screen 3 inches wide. He measures twice, sometimes 3 times, because wood you found in a dumpster doesn't forgive mistakes the way wood you bought does. There's no going back to the store for a replacement piece. Neighbors on the block start to notice. A few stop and watch for a minute before walking on. 1 or 2 ask what he's doing. Most just watch in silence, the way people watch anything that doesn't fit the story they expected to see on this corner. Not every piece goes up clean. One night, a wall he'd braced badly gives out and collapses in on itself. Hours of work flattened in a second, loud enough that a couple passersby actually turn and look. Q doesn't stop. He clears the broken pieces, salvages what's still usable, and starts that section again. Another night, it rains. Not a storm, just enough to soak through what he's built so far and remind him in the most physical way possible exactly what he's building this to keep out. He keeps going anyway. Piece by piece, the house takes shape. A door, a frame for a window, a roof that, for the first time in longer than he wants to think about, doesn't have a single gap in it. He wires in a small generator so he can have light after dark, something most people flip a switch for without a second thought, that Q has to build from nothing, wire by wire. And then, almost as an afterthought that isn't really an afterthought at all, he hangs a tapestry over the front door. Stay on that for a second, because it's the whole story in one image. A tapestry doesn't keep rain out, it doesn't stop wind. It serves no survival function whatsoever. What it does is turn a structure into a home. Every home sweet home sign ever hung above a doorway exists for the same reason that tapestry exists. Not because a house needs decoration to function, but because a person needs to walk through their own door and feel, even for a second, this is mine. Q could have stopped at 4 walls and a roof. Survival didn't require anything more than that. But somewhere in him, past the exhaustion of building at night with salvaged wood, there was still a person who wanted his front door to mean something, who wanted a plant hanging by the entrance, who wanted, even here, even now, to come home to somewhere that felt like home, not just shelter. That tapestry is the moment this story stops being about homelessness and starts being about dignity. Here's the part most people skip past too quickly. The city did offer Q a way out, more than once. He said no, every time. And it would be easy to write that off as stubbornness until you hear his actual reasons. He told a reporter who eventually found him that the shelter options felt more like a concentration camp than a way forward. His words, not softened, not exaggerated. But underneath that, there was something more specific and more practical. A shelter meant giving up his tools. He fixes and builds bikes to make money. That's his income, his skill, his path to something bigger. He's talked about wanting to become a mechanical engineer someday and start his own business. A shared shelter room isn't built for someone running a small repair operation out of it. His generator, his tools, his workspace, all of it stays outside if he goes in. He told people he hopes to live in an RV one day, not a shelter bed, not permanent supportive housing assigned by a caseworker, something that's his, that he can work out of, that he can move when he needs to. Think about the weight of that decision. A city offering a bed, a roof, a checkbox marked resolved, and a man choosing a hand-built structure over it. Because for the first time in years, this one came with no rules attached that weren't his own. Here's a number worth sitting with. In Los Angeles's official interim housing tiny home villages, the kind the city offered Q, the average stay, from move-in to whatever comes next, runs about 148 days, just under 5 months. That's not a knock on the people running those programs. 5 months to stabilize someone, connect them to healthcare, mental health support, and a caseworker, and start building a path to something permanent. By the standards of a large public system, that's actually fast. But Q didn't have 5 months. He had a 2-week clock that reset every time the sanitation crews came through his tent. And it wasn't just the stay itself that took time. The villages meant to house him took years to exist in the first place. Site selection, environmental review, community meetings, construction bids, permits. The city's very first tiny home village needed the better part of 2 years of planning before its first resident ever slept there. Q didn't have 2 years either. He had nights. So instead of waiting on a timeline measured in months and years, he built something in weeks, alone after dark, with wood nobody else wanted, and instructions from strangers on the internet. Not because the official path was wrong, because it was, for him, right then, simply too slow. That's the trade nobody puts on a brochure. The official system is more thorough, more supported, more likely to lead somewhere permanent. Q's system was faster than anything else available to him, on the exact night he needed it to be. The house is finished, or finished enough. That night, for the first time in longer than he can easily count, Q closes a door behind him. A door with a working lock. He lies down inside 4 walls he built with his own hands, under a roof he framed himself, and he sleeps. It's such a small thing to most people. A locked door. Nobody thinks about it. It's just there every night, unremarkable. For Q, that night, it was everything. The next morning, the city showed up. Not everyone on that block saw what Q had built the way he saw it. Some people stopped and told him it was genuinely impressive, a resourceful, well-built structure that clearly took real skill. Some left him supplies without being asked. A veteran walking past recognized something in him and gave a nod that meant more than words would have. But others complained. A structure on a public sidewalk, no matter how carefully built, no matter how many plants hung outside it, sits in a legal gray zone most cities have no real answer for. And Hollywood Boulevard is not an ordinary sidewalk. It's one of the most watched, photographed, and policed strips of pavement in the country. So, the calls started coming in, and with them came the machinery cities use whenever something exists that isn't supposed to. Notices, enforcement, sanitation crews assigned to encampment cleanups, officers doing routine checks on a stretch of boulevard that tourism boards spend millions marketing as spotless. A structure like Q's, hand-built, undeniably personal, undeniably there, doesn't stay invisible for long on a block like that. The city offered him a way out, a spot in temporary housing. Q said no. He told a reporter who eventually found him that the shelter options felt more like a concentration camp than a way forward. His words, not softened, not exaggerated, and that he preferred what he'd built with his own hands over a temporary stay somewhere he had no control over. Think about the weight of that decision. A city offering a bed, a roof, a checkbox marked resolved, and a man choosing a hand-built shack over it. Because for the first time in years, this one was his. Eventually, the gray zone closed a little. Police gave Q an actual deadline, days, not weeks, to be gone. For almost anyone else in his situation, that would mean the same thing it always means. Lose the structure, lose the work, start over from a dumpster with nothing. Not for Q. Remember the wheels, remember the metal carts under the floor, the whole reason he'd built it the way he had. This was the moment they were built for. He didn't tear the house down. He didn't abandon it. He rigged dollies under the frame and, board by board holding, tapestry still hanging over the door, he wheeled the entire structure down Hollywood Boulevard to a new spot. Picture that for a second. Not a man losing his home to enforcement, a man rolling his home past the people trying to remove it because he'd already solved the problem months before they showed up with a deadline. He was clear about one thing, to anyone who asked: he didn't want to move. But when he had to, he could. On his own terms, at his own pace, taking every wall and every board with him. That's not a workaround. That's the entire design philosophy of the house, working exactly as intended. A shop owner nearby asked about it, shrugged and said it wasn't hurting anyone. He'd rather have a man with a locked door than a tent that could be anywhere by morning. A woman walking her dog stopped one afternoon just to tell Q the plants out front were a nice touch. A man living rough himself a few blocks down came by more than once, not to complain, but because for him, Q's house was proof that it could be done. that you didn't have to wait for a program, a case manager, a waitlist. You could just start. And one officer, doing a routine pass down the boulevard, later admitted the calls about Q's house were some of the strangest of his shift. Not because the structure was dangerous, but because it was better built than half the actual complaints he usually responded to. Hollywood Boulevard, for one stretch of sidewalk, briefly had a house on it that told you more about what a home actually means than most of the mansions in the hills above it ever could. Q's house didn't stay a local curiosity for long. Once local news picked it up, it kept traveling, national outlets ran it, and it eventually made its way into a very different kind of conversation. A podcast about urban planning and housing policy, dissecting what a self-built structure on a sidewalk actually says about how cities respond, or fail to respond, when the official system moves too slowly. That's not nothing. It means the people who study housing policy for a living looked at one man's dumpster wood house and saw the same thing this video is arguing. That when institutions can't move fast enough, people build their own solutions out of whatever's on hand, because waiting isn't actually an option when you don't have anywhere to sleep tonight. Q didn't set out to make a policy point. He set out to stop losing his tent every 2 weeks. But the two things turned out to be the same story, just told at different scales. When the city built its first official tiny home village, a few miles from where Q was living, each individual unit, 8 feet by 8 feet, no bigger than a garden shed, cost around $130,000 to build. Not because the shelter itself was expensive. The company that manufactures them charged the city about $8,600 per unit. The rest went to concrete foundations, underground utilities, a staff office, fire alarm systems, the infrastructure required to make a temporary shelter legally sturdy enough to exist. 50 of the shelters sat in a shipping port for months while officials worked out the design. One city councilman, seeing the number for the first time, said publicly he was stunned. Later, villages brought the average down, but not by much. Independent researchers put the citywide average at somewhere around $42,000 per bed. Permanent supportive housing, the kind meant to be someone's home for good, has averaged closer to $600,000 a unit in recent years. Q's house cost him nothing but time, salvaged wood, a secondhand generator, tools he already owned from a job that no longer existed, no contract, no bid process, no concrete pad. None of this is an argument that Q's approach could replace the official one at scale. One man with a hammer and a phone isn't a housing policy, but it is a real, uncomfortable data point sitting right there on the sidewalk. A system spending 6 figures per unit and a veteran spending $0 arrived at the exact same result for one person on one night, a locked door, and somewhere dry to sleep. Here's the part where a documentary like this usually stops to bury you in statistics. We're not going to do that to you. You already know the shape of this problem. You've seen it on your own street, in your own city, whether or not you've ever really looked at it. So here's just enough to confirm what you already understand. Los Angeles County counts more than 70,000 people experiencing homelessness on any given night, and researchers who've checked that number against real street surveys think the true figure runs even higher. Nationally, on any single night, that number climbs into the hundreds of thousands. Most of them will never build a tiny house that makes the news. Most of them will simply do what Q did, quietly, without an audience, with whatever they can find. That's the whole point of this video. Q isn't the exception. He's just the one who got seen. Every day, tourists spend real money on this boulevard, chasing a feeling. The idea that something extraordinary could happen here, that this is the place where ordinary people become something more. Meanwhile, a few feet off the star-studded sidewalk, one of the most extraordinary things happening in this city all year was sitting there for free. No ticket required, no velvet rope. Just a man, a tapestry over a door, and a story most people walked straight past. Hollywood sells dreams for a living. Q just built one. Picture the boulevard on an ordinary afternoon. Tourists moving in both directions, phones up, eyes on their maps, on their photos, on each other. A family walks by. A kid, maybe 7, 8 years old, slows down. He's looking at the flowers hanging by the little wooden door. He tugs his mom's sleeve, points at the house, and asks the only question that matters: who lives there? If this story moved you, that's exactly why I make these. The ones that don't get the headlines they deserve. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.